Welcome to episode 154 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, so the word all spelled out, SEVEN health.com/154.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. So this week, it is the first solo episode I've done in a while. The last one was back in March time. And this episode is a personal one. So it's the third time I've done this kind of a show where I do a life update on what's been happening with me. And the last one I did was 10 months ago, which is much longer than I'd planned to leave between these life updates. And I try to keep the episodes fairly stripped back on the rambling front and just deal with the topic or the guest at hand. So this episode gives me a chance to update you on what's been going on in my life. And for anyone who doesn't care about what's going on in my life, you can simply skip this episode. So rather than having to fast forward the start of every episode for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, if I include it there, you can just simply skip this one. And I know this is something I say fairly regularly on the podcast, but then struggle to deliver on, is I really do want to be doing more of these solo episodes. And for me, as much as for you guys, I love having the time and space to write, and the process of putting together an episode helps me to solidify ideas in my head, as well as challenge the ideas that I have in my head. And I regularly release rebroadcast episodes, so putting out content that you may have missed. But what I've actually noticed is there's a load of episodes that I want to re-record because I've changed how I practice. And so what I said or part of what I said is no longer relevant. Or I've gone through the literature, or I've read someone else's book, or I've just updated my prior beliefs. And the podcast is going to be 4 years old in August. So I'd be more worried if things hadn't changed in all that time. So what I'm doing, or what I'm planning on doing, is going back through and doing a second edition on some of the episodes. So much like when books have a second edition. And I'd say for an episode, 70% or more of that episode will be the same, but I can then update the areas where I've changed my mind and explain why I've come to a different conclusion. And those should be starting soonish and should definitely make it easier for me to be getting out the solo episodes. So the last time I did a life update was back in July 2018. And a large chunk of that episode was talking about Ali and her health struggles leading up to and after Ramsay was born. And at that stage, it was about 9 months post-birth. And as a recap, Ali had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. She'd also had an undiagnosed infection that then ramped up after she was given a cortisol injection. And this then led to her requiring emergency surgery. So since then, things have got better. I mean, it was patchy, but it has definitely got better. Since that episode, she required 2 further surgeries after the initial one. And the last one of those was back in the September time last year. And it was pretty incredible how much things improved within a couple of weeks of that final surgery being completed. So whatever infection was going on was having a low grade or maybe not so low grade systemic impact. And things were by no means perfect after that, but there was a pretty obvious improvement in a matter of weeks. And while it was amazing that she was starting to feel better, it also felt a bit of a disappointing realization that after 14 months of maternity leave, she had a couple of weeks of feeling better and then was going back to work. And I'm stating the obvious here where we live in a country that has a very decent maternity laws and regulations in comparison to a lot of other places in the world. She works for an amazing company that goes well above and beyond the minimum of what is required for them to provide. But even with all that, there was a sense of this is not how she'd planned to spend her time. So she then returned to work back in the October time, and initially it was meant to be 3 days a week. She was actually doing the 3 days a week over 4 days, but just doing 4 shorter days. And that was the intention. But pretty quickly she realized she was still doing her old job. That was a full-time job with a heavy workload, but now trying to cram it into 3 days. And it just meant she was working lots in the evening time, but was still only getting paid for the 3 days. So rather than miss out on the money and do the work anyway, she went back to work full-time, I think probably after about 5 or 6 weeks. And so she's been doing that now for the last 6 months or so, but really is just too much. She gets home much later than she wants to and is not getting to spend as much time with Rams as she'd like. And it's a stress for the kind of work she does and being on call all the time. And especially with the rheumatoid arthritis, this doesn't help. And so she's going to be reducing her hours shortly to be doing 3 days a week instead. And we'll be doing a job share so that the days she's off, they are properly covered by someone else rather than it just being left until she comes back in. And look, given her experience and her knowledge, she'll probably get calls on her day off, but this is much more manageable than what is currently happening. And this should be helpful for me as well, because it is a real juggling act between the two of us with work and with Ramsay, like it is for most parents, where both people in the couple are working, or for single parents trying to make working and parenting work. And I know we have it much easier in many ways than lots of people. We have a childminder or a nanny that comes 4 days a week and looks after Ram 6 hours a day. But outside of that, we've been trying to juggle it all, and it definitely is a challenge. So I'm hoping that with Ali doing 3 days a week, I'll be able to get a bit more work done. So more podcasts, more blog posts, and other projects that I've been thinking about and working on behind the scenes. But that it'll also mean more downtime for both of us. So less of me having to work in the evening time and just having more breathing space without the constant panic that I have this small amount of allocated time and I have so much that I need to complete in that time. And while I may be unintentionally painting a picture of Ramsay just being this time drain or this burden, that's not actually how I feel. Like, he continues to be an awesome kid and I continue to enjoy fatherhood. He's now 20 months old and has gone from being a baby into being more of a little person. And during an episode I recorded around Christmas time, I mentioned he was walking and that he'd spent many hours on our flights to and from Sydney walking up and down the aisle following him. And he's continued to just want to constantly move his body and walk and run. And while this is obviously great, I do kind of feel sorry for our dog, Roxy. So during our morning walks, we used to cover, a pretty decent amount of ground. So in the 40 or 50 minutes we get a march on. And back then, Ramsay would be in the sling or in the off-road stroller, or even before that, he wasn't around. But now Ramsay wants to walk as well. And so we cover much less ground. Like, Ramsay's picking up sticks and stomping in puddles and generally taking in every square inch that we cover. And Rox is just there looking up at me, kind of wishing we'd move a little faster. But I mean, for a 20-month-old, it feels like Ramsay is able to walk a very long way. But I guess in comparison to what it was before, it's much more about being outside and taking in the world than covering mileage, which is also a good lesson for me to be patient and to be in the moment and take in the world, which, not always an easy task. He's also talking loads. So it started out with single words and then combining words together, and now he's repeating large chunks of what we say. He's always pointing out colors, the names of his different toys. We go shopping and he can tell me the names of all the food that I'm putting in the trolley. He's into opposites, so hot and cold and up and down and big and little. And not just saying random words or seeing what he sees, but really understanding how things go together. So he, for example, he wakes up and mentions that he wants to have strawberries and raspberries with his breakfast. And I say, oh, sorry, we've run out. And he tells me that he wants to put on his shoes so he can then get in my car so we can go to the shops and we can then buy said fruit. So he's able to understand how all those pieces fit together. There's certain letters that he can't say, so he calls himself Manny because he can't say R or he can't say S. And so it means there are times where I struggle to work out what he's saying. But if I typically look around the room or remember what we've done that day, I can most of the time work out what he's trying to say. His memory is incredible. I mean, there's many books that we've read over and over again, and you get halfway through a page and you stop and he'll just finish the rest of the sentence. And all of this is why humans are able to go from being completely dependent babies to growing into fully developed adults. But it is really fascinating watching this in real time. He continues to be a very competent eater. I recently did a podcast with Paige Smathers about family eating dynamics. It was episode 150. And in that, we made reference a lot to Ellen Satter. And I talked about her concept of the division of responsibility. And at that point, while I knew about Satter, I hadn't read any of her books. Now I've nearly finished Child of Mine, which is one of her books, and I really enjoyed it. And a lot of what she recommended we were already doing, but there have been things that we've now changed based on the information in the book. And interestingly, it's a book I've now started to recommend to clients. And clients who either don't have kids or have adult kids, so much past the stage that the book is relevant for. But why I think it's so helpful is because it very much talks about body trust and the inbuilt ability to regulate food intake. It talks about the importance of structure and having regular meals. So many of the ideas that it covers about being important for you to do for your child are what clients and what people need to be able to do for themselves. And what the book talks about is that you need to be doing this for yourself first so that you can do this for your child. And so it's quite a nice reminder in that sense. I also think it's great for clients to be able to then reflect on what their feeding dynamic was like growing up. And if they have certain issues with food or they have certain beliefs around food, they can start to potentially see where these stem from and how they could think differently because of what they're then learning from the book. But I know that was a bit of a tangent. On the Ramsay front, he continues to eat unlike his food. They talk in the book about children around 1 or so becoming much more of picky eaters for a time, and it feels like he simply skipped over that step. Like, yes, there are days where much of his food ends up on the floor, or he doesn't eat very much at lunch or at dinner, but we never force him to eat. We put the food in front of him, and it's up to him to choose what he wants to eat and how much he wants to eat. And if it's one of those meals where he doesn't eat very much at all, come the next meal or come tomorrow or come next week, his appetite returns and he goes back to eating how he usually does. And so it is really nice to see how much he enjoys food. And part of the niceness from it is because I know I was a picky eater as a child, which is definitely not the case anymore. But I thought because I was like that, there was a chance that he could also be. But no, eating is something he enjoys and that we get to enjoy with him. And when he was born, we made the decision to do no screen time with him. So no TV, no iPad, no phones for Ramsay. He just doesn't do screen time. I mean, we'll occasionally show him a video of him that we've recorded on a phone, or we'll show him a photo on a phone, but that's pretty much it. It was something that Ali and I felt rather passionately about. My brother has done this with his kids. I think his eldest is 4, nearly 5, and they've still kept it up. And it just means that Ramsay really loves playing, and he loves playing with his toys. He's building train tracks. He cooks in his little mini kitchen. He's playing with his cars. He's playing with teddies and his baby doll and all of that. And you just see this real creative side where he wants to just be doing things and playing. It means for us, there's a lot of reading of books. But I like this, and especially now, like seeing he's able to basically remember the whole of The Hungry Caterpillar verbatim. It's nice to see that kind of progress. And it's also easier now that it's getting warmer, and with the longer days and the better weather, he's just able to spend most of the day outside. We've got a nice big garden that he can play in. There's lots of nice parks around here, lots of nice walks to go on. He's just now running around outside playing with buckets of water and watering cans, or trying to pick all the flower heads off the flowers in the garden, which hopefully is just stage and we can get to change. In terms of me, I think I'm doing fairly okay. Like, it's probably stating the obvious, but becoming a parent takes quite a lot of adjusting to. I can't remember if I've said this on a podcast before. I feel I must have, but I don't remember when. But since moving out of the countryside over 5 years ago, I really have discovered how much of an introvert I am. It's not that I can't do social situations or I'm awkward in social situations. Like, I love seeing friends, but I just prefer to see one or two people at once. Or if I'm at a big party, I'm fine with being at a big party, but I just end up having a fairly in-depth conversation with one person at a time rather than having small talk with a large group. And so when we moved to the country after living in London, there was so much more time that I was on my own. Ali would go to work in London and I'd be working from home. I might go for a walk a couple of times during the day in the countryside and not see anyone. So I'd have days where I'd have 12 hours of the day and I'd not see another human being. And this was most days of the week. And I really enjoyed it. Like, I enjoy my own company and I can be alone without feeling lonely. And even on weekends before Ramsay was born, Ali would often be at some horse event. And so again, I'd have lots of my own time. Now, if I was always on my own, like, this would get to me. Like, I want connection, I want intimacy, I want to be with Ali and family and friends and other people, and I was getting this, but I also desperately need space and solitude. And from a work perspective, like, to be able to be creative and write blog posts and do podcasts and let ideas germinate and grow, but also from my mental health perspective, like, having time to be on my own and in my head actually does me a lot of good. And I'd say that this has probably been one of the biggest challenges for me since becoming a parent, that now there's very little alone time. Like, yes, I have alone time like now while I'm working, but this is with fairly strict parameters. Like, my work days have become cut almost in half. And so there's a lot less time to just be and think and let ideas breathe, and more a sense of, like, I've got this small allotted amount of time and I have all these things to do. And I imagine that many parents feel the same way as I do. I imagine that many people who aren't parents feel the same way that I do. I guess I'd just been very self-aware prior to having Ramsay and had set up my life intentionally, or even maybe stumbled upon it in a way. But I'd set up my life so it was very much in alignment with what I needed and what served me best. And now things have changed and I kind of need to find some middle ground. And maybe that's the job of being a parent and being a grown-up, that you need to find a compromise and be okay with compromising. And yeah, trying to find that middle place is kind of where we're at right now. Because it's not just me that feels this way. Like, Ali feels it too. She wants to have her own time and her own space. And so I don't think it's just about alone time. I think it's about life in general. Like, so many habits have had to change. And I used to walk a lot more than I do now. My sleep isn't as consistent as it used to be. Although I probably can't complain too much about that now. Like, Ramsay is pretty solid on the street front. I've made an effort this year to get back into cooking new recipes, but for a while that really took a hit and became fairly repetitive and time pressured. I remember when my folks were over last year, I was having a conversation with my dad, and he's currently in his late 60s. And he was saying that he'd noticed that for many people in their late 30s and through their 40s, like, health often takes a bit of a hit. And this is when people are typically having families and they're in the midpoints of their careers, and there's just more financial pressures and time pressures. And often this means that health takes a back seat simply because other things become a priority. And then at some point when someone is, say, 45 or 50, life circumstances have now changed. Kids maybe be older, potentially work has become less stressful, and health becomes a priority again. Or maybe health isn't the priority as much as circumstances change, that it means people can start to do things that are helpful for their health. So circumstances change, that means that they're now getting better sleep. They have more time to eat and prepare a meal. They start moving their body more again because they've joined a walking group, or they're getting back into golf, or they're out in the garden, or whatever it may be. So maybe they're not actively pursuing health, but because life has changed and certain habits have now started to come back in, or to come in for the first time, improved health naturally starts to occur. And this links to something I talked about in my goal setting podcast, which was episode 74. I made reference to the 4 burners theory, which is the idea that your life can be broken down into different sections. So you've got work, you've got health, you've got friends, and you've got family. And in the analogy, it asks you to imagine that as if they are a stove, and these are 4 burners on that stove. And as part of the theory, it states that there is a finite amount that you can give to these different areas of life, and that typically people end up with 2 of the burners on higher, and then 2 others much lower. And often in this stage of life where people are having kids, and the midpoint in their career, like that work and family take up most of the attention, while friends and health gets turned down. Or maybe this is the wrong analogy when thinking about health, that it isn't some static goal that we're walking towards, but rather it's fluid, it's dynamic, and when evaluating health, we need to take into account all of these other life circumstances rather than trying to analyze it in a vacuum. And yeah, all of this has made me start to reflect more on why people do what they do, especially in the realm of like what we think we're doing in terms of healthy behaviors. Because I'd argue that most of the time people aren't thinking about health when making choices. And people, myself included, eat in certain ways and do certain behaviors simply because they're A, a habit, and B, like they are the easiest option. Like you could look at what I eat or how I live and say it's healthy. And while I would say that health is maybe a determiner for why I do certain behaviors or eat certain things, if I'm actually following through on something, it's mostly because I enjoy it and because it's a habit. Like there are plenty of healthy things, potentially much healthier things than I'm doing right now, that I simply don't do. And telling me that they're healthy might persuade me to try them out, but I'd say the strike rate on that's going to be pretty low. Like most of the health things that I hear about just get ignored or just don't get done. And so if I am to try something out and keep it up, it won't be because it's healthy. It'll be because I did it enough times for it to become a habit. And maybe I did it enough times because I did notice some obvious benefit. That if we're thinking from, say, a food perspective and I'm doing something new, maybe I like the taste of it. Maybe it left me feeling fuller for a longer time. Maybe it was easy to prepare. Maybe it worked well with something I already knew how to cook. But none of this is about healthfulness per se. And this is so much about what happens with life. Like the habits that you pick up and keep up are often less about whether they're healthy or not. It's just about what you've done repeatedly and what's the easiest option. And so it's with this in mind that I can think of how things change when you have a child or you have multiple children or really any big change in life. Like you're starting a new company or you're going through a divorce or a parent or a close relative is sick or even just like getting a new puppy. Like all of these things are now taking up time and altering your emotional life, often in pretty profound ways. And so these changes mean that you're pushed out of the groove that you were in. So things fall by the wayside so that other things can come in. And before you know it, you're in some new groove where you are back on autopilot and doing things in a way that now feels like this is the new normal. And I tend to think of myself as a fairly empathetic and compassionate person. And at the very least, I have these traits in my work life. Like to do what I do, you really have to. But I think there's been just this added dimension to all that since having a child and Ellie being unwell for quite a while. That life's hard and that it's not always easy just to get on with things. And this is especially true when getting on with things really means making changes. And like a tiny example of this with myself is running. Like if you listen to my recent podcast about a day in my life, I talked about getting back into running. Well, actually, since recording that podcast, things have fallen away again. And the marathon I was meant to do didn't happen because the friend I was doing it with pulled a hamstring. And then it also just feels like since the end of February, I've been having this succession of 3 and 4 day work weeks because Ali was ill, or the nanny was ill, or the nanny was away, or it was public holidays over here, or it was Easter. And yeah, I tried to count back, and I think there were only 2 weeks or so since the end of February where I did a normal 5-day work week. And so when this happens, like things naturally drop away, and running, which was a new habit, wasn't that high on my order of priorities. It was a nice to have, not something that was a must do. And now with the weather being nicer, I've been playing golf when I have a chance to on the weekend. If I'm choosing between going for a run or playing golf, pretty much playing golf will always win. So yeah, I guess this has just demonstrated to me like how hard making changes can be, and that if something isn't seen as a priority, then this is even more difficult. And so I know I started this section with kind of answering how I've been doing, and now we've gone off on this like rambling journey all over the place. So I'd say I'm doing well, all things considered, and feeling good on the whole. Yeah, accounting for the usual ups and downs of life and being a parent and running a business, etc. But life is infinitely easier than it was a year ago, and when I recorded the last life update. I'm working towards like finding ways to have more alone time and more downtime, and for Ali to be able to do the same. And yeah, with Ali cutting down her work to 3 days, this should hopefully make all of this easier. In terms of the business side of things, like this is all really positive. So the financial year running from April 2018 to April 2019 was like far and away my best year. And this is true on the financial perspective, but it's also true in terms of the results I'm seeing with clients, with my marketing and the sign-up process with clients, with the content I'm putting out and how I talk about what I do. It just feels like the business has matured in a lot of ways in the last year or so. I'm now at a point where client spots are in such demand that I'm planning on taking on another practitioner to work alongside me. There's logistics I need to figure out with all of this, so it won't be until most probably the end of this year or the start of next year. But that's the direction that I want to go, where 7 Health becomes not just me, but becomes a big company. And this is something that really felt like a dream a short while ago, but really now feels like the natural next step. And there's 2 big reasons for this. Like the first and biggest reason is Julie. So Julie is a business advisor or a business coach. I think the term business coach comes with some baggage and often feels like it's in the same realm as life coach, where it's about mindset and confidence building. And while there's nothing wrong with this, and it is a tiny part of what Julie does, she is much more about like strategy and finance and product and positioning and really understanding the finer details of my business and what's important and what I'm trying to do. And I started work with her back in March of 2018. And yeah, it's just made a huge difference. Like she's been phenomenal. I've mentioned her to a number of friends, and at least one of them, could be more, is now working with her too. So yeah, if you're looking for help, then I can't sing her praises highly enough. I'll put a link to her in the show notes, but her business is called Elevated Outcomes, but with the word elevated spelt with 2 L's. So ELLEVATED and elevatedoutcomes.com. The second big reason things have been better is the new time constraints and how much this has then forced me to be very specific with how I spend my time. And honestly, this should happen regardless of time restraints, but it was just because having Ramsay, but that it became so apparent. And so previously, I could always attempt to outwork a problem, to do a 50 or a 60-hour week. And that was kind of what I did most weeks, where I was always busy and I'd have a long to-do list. And no matter what was going on or what the problem was, I would just work more. Now, obviously, that's not a great strategy because you can easily spend a lot of time doing things that aren't worthwhile, which is what I did. And it wasn't like they were totally wasted time. Like, I learned from those experiences. But when working 50 and 60 hours a week is taken off the table, then you need to figure out what you should do with the limited time. So this last year has been a lot about honing and pruning and getting better with how I use that time. And yeah, Julie has been instrumental in helping me figure that stuff out. And look, I don't want to overstate the changes in terms of how I am. Like, it's nowhere near as seamless as I may be potentially making it sound. Like, my workday has many more interruptions than it used to. Writing projects often are done in multiple chunks as I can't get a whole piece done in one go. I'll have days or times where I struggle to get things done. Like, poor sleep I've talked about how much I prioritize sleep and how important I think sleep is to my overall health and overall ability to function and think properly on various podcasts. But that has definitely become apparent since having a child. And it's mostly better now. But yeah, there had been times when Ramsay was awake a lot through the night, and I would feel somewhat like a zombie the next day, which, when speaking to a client and doing that kind of work, I'm actually fine with. I'm able to just switch on and I'm good to go. But it's when I'm left to do more of the behind the scenes work of running a business. So whether that be writing or the finance side of things, or just, anything where I don't have to be in front of someone, that's when I would struggle. And I think there's like the combination of having lots of work that needs doing and then feeling tired is when I become most unproductive. Like, overwhelm is not a motivating factor for me. It is really a paralyzing factor, especially if I'm tired. And so I remember having days where I'd have so much to do, but just kept finding myself on Facebook or on Instagram. And so I took both of them off my phone, and then I found that I'd start checking the news on my phone. And I don't think I'd ever used the news app prior to this. But now with Facebook and Instagram gone, I needed something else to kind of mindlessly scroll through. And so news became that outlet. And I'd catch myself and I'd be thinking, like, what are you doing? And so I'd put my phone away, or I'd close whatever I was reading and again attempt to get work done. And sometimes this would work, and other times I would simply give up. So I'd go out for a walk, I'd put on a podcast, or I'd put on an audio book, and I just knew I wasn't going to get anything done. So I guess whatever idea you have of me from this show, know that I still struggle with or like the rest of humanity, like with anxiety, with overwhelm, with feeling like a failure or like I should be further along, with wanting to procrastinate or do the easy thing in the moment, and having that become so bad that I simply have to stop attempting to work and just take myself off for the rest of the day. And interestingly, it is amazing how much this stiff stuff just recedes when my sleep gets better and how it returns when it's disrupted again. Like, sleep seems to be the link that makes all of this infinitely worse. But yeah, overall, apart from these intermittent times of struggling, I am much happier with where the business is at. I've had to let a lot of things go, but I'm okay with that. I'm currently having a new website built as we record this. We've had a couple of months of figuring out branding and how it will all look in sort of PDF form, and now it's in the build process. I've seen some steps along the way, so it's kind of part done, and it should be ready for final testing in the next week or two. So I'm hoping to launch shortly afterwards, so it's probably sometimes in the June time. My site has needed an overhaul for a very long time, and so I'm excited that this is finally happening. And once it's all done, and at some point later in the year, I'm planning on doing an updated podcast on the business side of things. Like I know I'm touching on certain aspects here, but there is much more I'd like to say on the topic. And back in 2016, in April 2016, so more than 3 years ago, I released episode 37 of the podcast called Setting Up and Running a Successful Practice. And in that, I detail my journey up until that point, and my insights from what it had been like being in business for I think at that stage it must have been 7 years, somewhere around there. But yeah, as I said, that was over 3 years ago, and much has progressed and changed since then, and so I want to add to it. Our garden office is finally finished. I'm still not in it yet, but the work finally finished up last week. And this has been a much bigger undertaking than we initially anticipated. So the building the office was actually fairly straightforward, and happened in about a week or so, longer to do the painting and that. But yeah, that was pretty quick. But it was everything else that having to happen around it. So beforehand, having to clear the site and putting up fencing, and then more of the afterward stuff. So in terms of getting electric and internet out to the office. So we have a very long, narrow garden, and the office is nestled right at the back of that. So it's about 150 meters back from the house. But the electric box is out the front of the house, and so they needed about 200 meters of cabling to connect it. And unbeknownst to me before starting this project, the longer the distance of the cabling, the more wattage you were dropping over that distance. And so we ended up needing to get industrial size cabling. That's both ridiculously expensive and ridiculously heavy. And this then had to be dug under concrete, go through gardens, go over a stream, and then under grass. Because of regulations, this needed to be dug at certain depths. So yeah, the little project of putting an office in the garden turned out to be a much bigger than expected. But it is now done. It looks awesome. It's a big space. It's 4 meters by 7 meters, with the plan being to use it not just for me as my office, or for Ali and I as the office, but to be able to do workshops, to be able to do mini retreats for 10 or 12 people. I mean, we need the grass and the garden to grow back after all the digging. And I need to work out exactly what would be on offer as part of this. But yeah, that's the plan, to be using the office for other things apart from just somewhere for me to work out of. Something else that's exciting as well as long overdue is that we finally picked a wedding date and venue. So I got engaged at the end of 2016. And then a couple of weeks later, we found out that Ali was pregnant. And then basically since then, there has been so many more important things going on that planning a wedding was just put to the side. But at the start of this year, things felt less chaotic, and that we were in a place to start planning a wedding. When we first got engaged, we talked about different places to get married. And I was always fairly keen to do it somewhere in Europe, but outside the UK. So there's something special about traveling to a destination for a wedding. So I've been to friends' weddings in Cape Town. I've been to a number in the south of France. And they're all just so memorable because you make a holiday out of it. You typically get to spend more time with everyone, not just on the wedding day, but beforehand and afterwards. So yeah, when we were first looking online, we picked the south of France. Because I mean, it's somewhere we kind of knew from other friends' weddings, but also various trips out there. And yeah, back in 2016, we found this place online that we loved and bookmarked. And then at the start of this year, when we got back into the planning, we checked out the place we'd bookmarked and loved it just as much as we did originally. And so in late February, we flew out to Toulouse to check it out, as well as seeing another venue. It was during the time when Europe was having this insane warm spell in the middle of winter. So it was like 20 degrees for people in the US in Fahrenheit. That's like nearly 70, 68, 69, somewhere around there. At the high point of the day. So this is in the middle of February. And so I'm out in a t-shirt. We're putting sunscreen on Ramsay. It was very bizarre. And also because we were so close to the Pyrenees Mountains. So one day I'm in t-shirts and the next day we drove for 90 minutes up the mountains and then we're pulling Ramsay on a sled in the snow. But yeah, anyway, we saw 2 venues and both of them were very stunning, like very different in what they offered, but both beautiful. And in the end, picked the one that we'd found nearly 3 years earlier online. It's this rustic French chateau that's on its grounds has this 10th century Benedictine abbey, and with a pool that is then surrounded by the abbey walls. And the venue does retreats and private music gigs, and you can hire it out. And it has this very chilled, understated, homely feel. And it felt very us. And so, yeah, we've booked it in and we're having a wedding on the 1st of May, 2020. We're now working with a French wedding planner because neither Ali or I speak French. And despite the wedding being nearly 12 months away, we're spending a lot of time sorting things out in the evening. But hopefully all of this front loading will mean it will be less stressful later on. We're hoping to go back out in the next couple of months to do some food and wine tasting to work out suppliers. And so this is definitely part of the wedding planning that I can get on board with. Like eating cheese and profiteroles and washing it down with French wine and French sparkling is an easy part of planning a wedding. And I think that's about it. Like undoubtedly, because there's been such a long gap between updates, there's lots that I've forgotten to include. But yeah, that's the headlines from my life. Thanks again for listening. I hope you found this interesting. It does feel somewhat strange to be talking about my life in a microphone for it to then just go out to an audience of mostly anonymous listeners. But I know how much I enjoy shows of this nature from other podcasts where I like and am invested in the show and in the host. So hopefully some of you enjoy it. I guess if nothing else, Mum, this brings you up to speed on my life and anything I've missed out on during our FaceTime chats. So yeah, I should be back next week with another episode. Or otherwise it could be a rebroadcast one. I'm not sure at this stage. But anyway, another new episode will be out soon enough. Until then, look after yourself and I'll catch you soon.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7, health.com.